When we last saw this mower, we had gone through the carb and fixed an issue with the pull rope being yanked back out of your hands. Everything was going great, but it soon turned pretty disappointing when it stopped working and it didn't want to start back up. Now these are times I do not look forward to because it just means I have a lot more work to do, but the best part was the amount of advice I received that a lot of the viewers gave to me, and you'll never guess what the issue turned out to be. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt branded lawnmower, and the problem is that it will start and run, but after a minute it will stop and will not start back up. Now to be honest, I thought this was going to be a pretty simple fix, but I was wrong, and in the most extreme possible way too. Now I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So when the problem happened in the last video, a lot of the comments centered around the ignition system, mainly the ignition coil or even the spark plug. However, my take was that it was always a fueling issue, which was confirmed when it wouldn't start. I could prime it with gasoline and it would start and run and then stop again. But what I wasn't expecting were the comments that were not related to the carb, but instead to the rest of the fuel system. Some of the comments wanted me to take a look at the fuel tank and the fuel line for a blockage, which I thought was kind of strange considering that in all my years of doing this kind of hobby, I think it's only happened once where I had a fuel restriction that was not in the carb. I do believe I even had a few comments asking about the fuel filter and how that could have been an issue as well, which yet again would be a very rare occurrence since I don't think I've ever had an issue with one of these ever clogging up. I guess there was always a chance for something like that to happen, but I've gotten so used to not having to worry about that issue that I've just overlooked it for the last decade. So let me just add some fuel to the tank, which for some reason is completely empty, and then try starting it and show you what it's doing. So of course it's not going to start for us, which could mean that the fuel we just put into the tank is having a tough time getting to the carb. Now to test this theory out, I'm going to physically prime the engine with gasoline and see if it starts and runs for at least a few seconds. So as you can see, priming the engine with fuel did help out a lot, but it looks as though the carb ran out of fuel, which means I think the viewers might be right about a fuel flow restriction. Unfortunately, I'm also noticing a trace amount of gasoline on the mowing deck right under the carb, so I think the carb might be leaking fuel as well. That would also explain what happened to several ounces of fuel that disappeared from the tank since the last time I put some in. Of course, knowing that would also help to make sense of what I'm seeing here. As you can see, the filter is letting me know that yes, the carb was leaking and most of it has soaked into the filter. Now apparently the leak was extremely slow because very little of it made its way out of the airbox and instead evaporated while on the filter. After getting the base out of the way, you can see that the carb is covered in a thin film of gasoline, which confirms what we already know. So from the tips I received, it seems the flow of gasoline from the tank past the filter and through the line is being restricted. To test that theory, I'm going to take the fuel line off from the carb and let it drain into a bowl and see how slow it's draining. And from what I'm seeing, I think the viewers were correct. The flow should be at least twice as much, so we've definitely got something going on in the rest of the fuel system. And since we know there's something restricting fuel flow, I think it'd be wise to take off the carb for an inspection just to make sure there's nothing wrong with it. And even if there's nothing wrong with the carb, I'm going to throw it into a bag and put it into the cleaner again just to see if I can fix the leaking issue. So here's one end of the fuel line, and right off the bat I can see that there's something blocking the opening, which really shouldn't be there. Not only that, but the outlet of the fuel tank looks to be holding fuel from dripping out of it, which is not typical either. So it would seem that the issue goes from the tank all the way through the fuel line, which means the first place I want to check is the fuel line. And as you can see, what I'm pushing out of the line is something that shouldn't be there, so it looks as though we'll need to see what's inside the fuel line. Not only that, we'll also need to see what's inside the filter and also try and clear any obstructions in the tank as well. But before I go on, I do want to get the cleaner ready because according to the comments I've gotten, there's apparently quite a bit of prep time involved when using one of these. Now, I'm not going to get into the details right at the moment, but the information I'm getting is quite literally all over the place. Now for this one, I'm still going to use the plastic bag, but I've since gotten rid of it, and when you hear why, you may want to reconsider getting one of these. Now, from what I can tell, everyone has their own way of using one of these cleaners, and some will just take other people's recipes and it might work for them, but they may not have a really good reason as to why it works. The same goes for me. I've tried almost every single way that I have access to, and now I've come up with my own way with my own reasonings as to why I do it. I'll probably end up doing a video on this topic sometime in the future, but just know this, some of what I've been told simply doesn't work, at least for me. So as you can see, there's something clinging to the outlet of the fuel tank, and after spraying some carb cleaner on it, turns out that didn't help very much. Instead, I had to flush the fuel tank using gasoline at first, but it was so bad that I had to switch over to using the garden hose to clean out all the debris that was in it. Now I know it's hard to see, but there's some stuff sitting at the bottom of the cup, however you'll get a better view of it here in a bit. So the cleaner just finished its first round of cleaning, and it's hard to tell if it's any better, but I'm still going to go for a second round anyway just to make sure. So here's a clip of me pouring in a few ounces of gasoline into the fuel tank for a flush, and what comes out of it is a bit of a mystery. So what you're looking at looks to be bits and pieces of a large cell filter media, which is something I've never seen before from inside a fuel tank. So the big question is, how did this all get in there, and how is it clogging the outlet of the fuel tank? Shouldn't it all be in the carb instead? So I can only guess as to the reason why, but either the filter media got in the fuel can at the station, or for some reason this particular tank has a large filter at the bottom of it as some sort of baffling, but that wouldn't make any sense. But if you notice, this tank isn't like other tanks. It has a raised part at the top that more than likely had this foam in there as part of a venting and emission system, so that's where the debris probably came from. The reason why is because this particular fuel cap is not designed to vent any air, so the raised part along with these two ports take care of the venting. Now the reason why you don't see this design is because of this very reason of the filter coming apart and clogging the outlet port. Now just for your information, here's a different fuel tank from a different project, and it's the conventional one with a regular venting cap. I've cut it open to show you what it looks like in there and why it is that when you put several ounces of gasoline in it, it's not visible. As you can see, the tank is split up into two sections, an upper part and a lower part. The lower part holds at least 8 ounces of gasoline, and at the outlet you can also see a fine mesh screen. The screen is extremely fine, that way it will keep out any large pieces of debris from getting past it, and its positioning will also try and keep a small amount of water from making it out as well. Of course, if you put a whole lot of water into the fuel tank, it will make its way out through the outlet, but it might be able to deal with 1 to 2 ounces of water instead. That means the main screen was able to keep all the bits of filter from making it to the carb, but let's see if that extra filter did any good. And surprisingly, after opening it, turns out yes, it did do something, which means these filters are worth installing. However, after some time, if you don't clean them or replace them, they will start to restrict fuel flow. So in that way, it just means extra work you have to do, but to be honest with how the carb first looked when we took it apart, I think I might have to start considering installing these. Of course, I'm not going to try and clean and reuse this one. Instead, I already have plenty of these in stock, but I really never wanted to install them. We're finally at the part where we look at the fuel lines, which I think had the most impact on how much fuel flow was being restricted. Now, I cut the worst one in half to inspect it, and all I can say is amazing. This is what happens when you leave ethanol fuel in your system for a long time, and why you shouldn't use it in small engines. Now, because of long exposure, it's basically broken down the inner rubber part and has turned it into gum. But if you use 100% gasoline in your fuel tank, this is less likely to happen, as mentioned by many of the commenters. I also want to show you how much the flow from the outlet has improved after flushing the tank with a garden hose and letting it dry for several hours in the sun. Now, it's not a waterfall, but it's a whole lot better than before. That means the carb should now be getting plenty of fuel to keep the engine running for a lot longer than a few minutes. At this point, I think it's now time to put the tank back onto the engine, put the carb back together and back on as well, and after installing a new fuel line and filter, see if all this effort was worth it. Now, I'm not worried that the carb has any issues with it. It was just the fact that we had it apart and I felt the need to clean it again, and I wanted to see if cleaning it would stop the fuel leak. I will say one thing about this cleaner, it's a much easier way of being lazy when it comes to cleaning a carb. So does that mean I've changed my stance about owning one of them then? Not really, I still think they're just an extra tool to be used. But would I recommend getting one? Well, that answer is for you to decide on. If you think you're going to need to use it 100 times this year and the savings in time and money from it would offset its cost, then yes, get one. But if you think you're only going to use it 10 to 20 times a year, I'd say save your money and just purchase several cans of carb cleaner instead. So luckily it started very easily, even with the light pull and running better than ever. Now in real time the engine was running for about 4 minutes, so it should be pretty warm. And of course the bigger question is, will it start back up with the engine near operating temperature? So it would seem that this mower is working like it should, and after filming I did use it for a longer test, and not only did it work for a longer time, it also stopped leaking any fuel as well. So how would I sum up this repair then? Well, it's a bit convoluted, but basically this mower was neglected by leaving fuel in the tank, which basically gummed up the lines. Not only that, but the new and improved emissions design failed mainly due to the same neglect, which then turned into something much worse. And the takeaway from this repair is to use good fuel or run the mower until all the fuel is gone before putting it away. Unfortunately, this mower is still not ready to be used, let alone sold, and that's because we need to deal with the last few items, but we'll have to save that for another day. So my question is, after watching this repair, would you install an inline fuel filter, and if not, why not? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.